So we don't have the same rights as non-owning tenants, whether it's an apartment or a mobile home or whatever. We are less than they are because we have less leverage. And I'll even use charged verbiage. We're hostage to the landlord and feel hijacked and have less recourse. It's just unfortunate and unfair.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, our show is about mobile home parks. Mobile homeowners face unique challenges. They own their home, but they must rent the land on which their home sits. Every year, that rent goes up, yet the value of their home tends to go down. This can create a vicious cycle that can be incredibly difficult for a mobile home owner to break out of. This podcast episode today is an edited version of the town hall that I held on Zoom last week. The main guest is attorney Charles Ward of Alaska Legal Services. He answers questions specific to mobile homeowners. I also included an excerpt that I did with my younger brother, David Andrew, at Thanksgiving last year. My younger brother owns several mobile home parks and speaks from the perspective of a mobile home park owner. Throughout the episode, you will hear attendees of the town hall asking questions. Most are identified by their first names. Finally, we will hear from Demetria Veasy, the Assistant Director of Workforce Services at the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development. She will discuss resources available at job centers throughout the state to help folks achieve higher paying employment. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the House District 20 Town Hall for Mobile Home Owners. We are very pleased to be joined by Charles Ward from Alaska Legal Services, who is here tonight to answer questions that you might have as a mobile home owner. We also have Demetria Veasy, who's the Assistant Director of Workforce Services, and that's through the Department of Labor. She is going to be doing a short presentation towards the end of the town hall about the services that are available to folks. And to get started, though, Charles Ward, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a two-time graduate from the University of Oklahoma. I've been an attorney at Alaska Legal Services now. I've had two stints. I was there for about a year, then left for about a year, then came back, and I've been there now for about 18 months in my second stint. A lot of what I do is landlord-tenant law, do some other things as well, like Social Security law, have some issues with, we do wills and trusts, and sometimes we get other cases that come across our plate, but a lot of what I do is landlord-tenant.
And are you based in Wasilla?
I am. My office is in Wasilla. I live in Eagle River, but my office is in Wasilla.
What's the difference between renting an apartment and owning a mobile home and renting the spot in the mobile home park?
When you rent an apartment, you have a set aside amount of space, but you have no real ownership interest in that space. You have an agreement with the landlord to occupy it for a certain amount of time, usually year to year. Whereas in a mobile home park, that's where it becomes a little different and trickier because usually, not always, but usually you own the mobile home. There are some people that rent mobile homes just like they rent apartments, but usually you own the home, but you put it on a pad in a mobile home park. And the mobile home park provides hookups for utilities and theoretically a safe place to keep your home. But in exchange for that, you do pay rent. And the rent on the pad is just like paying rent at a apartment or for a house. It's every month or usually every month. And usually you sign a lease just like you would with an apartment. And so the tension comes is what happens if I can't get my lease renewed, but I've got this house that is on a pad, and they call them mobile homes, but they really aren't. Some are in a condition now that they just really can't be moved. And even a newer or more modern model, moving it is an expensive and arduous undertaking because you have to split it up and rent oversized trailers and all those things. So it's not something you can just pick up and move like the name would suggest.
Does the Landlord-Tenant Act apply to a mobile home owner renting a pad in a mobile home park?
Yes, generally speaking, it does. In fact, there are special provisions within the Landlord-Tenant Act that just describe mobile home parks and mobile home renting pads, things like that. And I'm sure we'll get into those here in just a minute. But yes, so your landlord has to provide at least an opportunity for you to have water, opportunity for you to have heat, an opportunity for you to have electricity. I say opportunity, that doesn't necessarily mean the mobile home park owner has to provide those things or has to pay for them for you, but has to provide you access to those things. Generally has to keep the grounds in good condition. Some of those duties can be assigned, and it's a little easier to assign those duties to a tenant in a mobile home park because you can differentiate an area around your home, which is yours. And whereas you might like to have a flower bed or something like that, but they can also, they, generally speaking, would within reason would have to let you have that area around your home, but also within reason, they can also expect you to keep it clean and tidy. They can put certain restrictions on pets or things like that if they wanted to, but typically my experience is mobile home park owners do not do that. Or at least the restrictions they put on are size or weight or breed as opposed to just a blanket no pets.
Gotcha. Are there any restrictions on what the rent can be for the pad and how often that rent can be increased and how much that rent can be increased?
Generally speaking, no. Of course, if you have a lease for the pad, that describes the amount you pay a month for the term of the lease. Again, usually a year, but can be longer, can be shorter. So during the term of the lease, of course, they can't just say, we don't like you that you're only paying $400 a month in pad rent. We're going to charge you $500 a month. And you say, no, I've got a lease. You can't do that. But when it comes time to renew, unfortunately, the market really, they're really allowed to test the waters of the market and see what would be held up. There is some tension in the law because they can evict you for non-payment of rent, but if you're willing to pay rent, but there's a absurd rent increase that has no justification, you might perhaps be able to challenge that. But I've never seen anything go to court that allows you to do that simply because of the setup of mobile home parks and the way they work. But certainly a reasonable increase in rent is going to be permitted, and frankly, probably up to a certain point, an unreasonable amount of rent increase is going to be permitted.
I don't know if you can speak to the average rent being paid for pads in the greater Anchorage area. In my district, I know of folks paying, the lowest I know is it's like $535, like about a little over $500 a month. But I do know folks paying as much as $700 a month. And the largest parks in my district, they're paying over $500 a month, and that does not include trash pickup. So they're really getting very minimal services for the amount of rent that they pay. Would you say that's fairly typical, or, and I don't know if it's different in the Valley?
I can't speak as to a difference in services between, say, Anchorage and the Valley, or that's frankly a little bit more expensive than in my experience, but certainly not so far out of field that I think that's out of the question or wrong or anything. I know I had a case in Kenai not too terribly long ago. Obviously can't get to the details of it, but the pad rent there was a little bit lower than what you're describing. But yeah, if they were to say, we're not going to let the trash company come here and pick up, or we're not going to provide any way for you to get rid of your trash, that could be an issue, but they don't typically have to provide that trash pickup for you. It's not like an apartment complex where, yes, if there's a certain number of apartments, they would have to have a main collection point that they're responsible for.
Could I interject really quick?
Sure.
Pardon me. My name is Jennifer, and I live in a trailer park. I'm an owner here in Anchorage, and my space rent is now $800. It was $600, and he jumped it up to $800 starting January this year. So now you know of somebody paying $800 for space rent.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's the highest pad rent that I've heard, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Charles, let's say somebody's rent has been increased to $800 a month. And as you pointed out, despite the name mobile home, these homes are not mobile. What do you do when you own your mobile home, but you are no longer able to afford the pad rent every month?
I don't have an easy answer for that. I wish I did, because like I say, in Alaska, the rents are determined pretty much solely by the market. And when it's a renter's market, it's probably great. But I moved to Alaska in 2010, and it's not been a renter's market since 2010. It's a landlord's market. And if you're on the other end of it, it's a seller's market. It's a very good question, but unfortunately, it's not one that has a very good answer. You're left to try to figure out how to make that $200 a month gap up, whether that's through getting rid of something else or whether that's through a social service or government program. And those do exist. But yeah, it's a case of there you are. There's not much to do about it.
Is there a case where you're essentially forced to put your mobile home up for sale?
Well, obviously, the mobile park owner can't force you to do that, but they can make it if that's their goal, they can make it difficult for you insofar as they can raise the rent. And you could get into an issue of whether they're retaliating against you, but then you'd have to point to a specific provision of the Landlord Tenant Act that they are violating before you can make a retaliation claim. I don't know if I'm going to pay $1,000 a month. I know that's probably less than what a studio apartment in Anchorage costs, but it's not that much less. And so, yeah, I'll sell my mobile home and use some of that money to live in an apartment, or maybe even put a down payment on a house if I'm so fortunate. But as it stands right now, there's nothing that would prevent the landlord from charging whatever rent they felt like charging and felt that they could collect.
It's tricky because I feel like when they increase the rent like that from $600 to $800 a month, I believe it actually would depress the value of your mobile home. If you try to sell your mobile home, which is itself not mobile, and you're going to have to price it down to compensate for them raising the rent, because someone's not going to pay a premium to move into a park where they're going to have this exorbitant rent every month.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just don't have
An answer
for you as the laws are as we speak today.
One thing that could come up is the possibility of the mobile homeowners within a park of actually purchasing the park and creating it into a co-op. Do you have any advice about that or opinion about that?
It sounds like a fantastic idea. There's nothing in the law specifically that would prevent it. In fact, I saw that was part of maybe coming up in the discussion. So I did a little Googling and found that there are groups out there that will help people that live in mobile home parks that are interested in perhaps co-oping to own their own mobile home park. And they've had really some fantastic success. Now, if you have, of course, if you have, say, 50 people or 50 homes in a mobile home park, and that may be a little bigger than average in an Anchorage area, I don't know, but.
Oh no, we have way bigger than 50.
Yeah. So you're going to have 50 different people that you're all trying to get together to agree on something. And you're certainly going to want to get people that have done that before to help you, but also two, I know, not plugging for clients, but you're going to want some legal help with that as well to make sure that everybody understands. But the way those things typically work is everybody owns their own home, but you collectively own the ground underneath it. And so that way if there is a rent increase, it has to go through the board of directors, and the board of directors has to justify it. And they have to say, yeah, unfortunately, the service that we've been providing has gone up $25 a month, so your rent has to go up $25 a month. Whereas you're not at the whim of a mobile park homeowner or something like that. Now, of course, you've also got to have a willing seller, or being able to buy a piece of land that's properly zoned for a mobile home park and that you could set up that way.
Hey, before I open it up, can you tell us about Alaska Legal Services and what types of services you offer for mobile home owners potentially?
Sure. Alaska Legal Services is a nonprofit law firm. We offer civil legal services for mostly low-income clients, but also clients, seniors and elders over 60. Run the gamut of things we offer, but when we specifically talk about mobile home parks, we offer services insofar as it's maybe as simple as advice. You call and say, hey, can my landlord, the mobile home park owner do this? And I say, yes, they can, or no, they can't, or something like that. Or if you're facing eviction, we often are able to help either fully representing you or at least give you guidance through that process. So if mobile home owners are running into issues, and I know we've helped mobile home owners in the past, since I worked there, it does come up. Certainly can help with any issues you may be having with your owners, or maybe even with a neighbor.
I noticed at the mobile home parks in my district, the street maintenance ends as you enter that mobile home park.
Mhm.
And especially in a year like this where we had so much snow, are mobile home parks allowed to charge for plowing separately from the rent, or should that be included in their rent?
That should be part of the rental agreement, whether it's actually included in the rent or set aside as a separate charge that you'll pay $600 a month for your pad rent plus $50 a month for snow plowing or whatever it is. But I would say the mobile home park owner does have a responsibility to keep the common areas reasonably plowed. So if they're not doing that, and if all of a sudden they say we want $100 a month for us to do that, you can say that's not part of the deal, and it's your responsibility to make sure this happens. So maybe the landlord puts it in the next rental agreement, but until that's part of the rental agreement, no, the landlord's responsible for that.
Thank you so much. I'll ask the question from the chat. Someone sent me a direct message. The person in the chat is interested in the co-op idea, and they're wondering if a mobile home owners create a co-op, then they're able to improve their leases. They would be the ones establishing the leases. So they would create the term.
Right. But presumably they would not create leases that would be tenant unfriendly, because they'd have to be unfriendly towards everybody, including themselves.
Roger.
So that's not a matter of law. That's really a matter of more economics than it is law. But you would not expect somebody to create a lease that is unfriendly towards themselves.
Exactly. Thank you.
You guys can hear me.
Yes.
I had actually two questions. In our mobile home park this last summer, I'm pretty sure it was this last summer, we had a culvert that ended up basically collapsing in on itself. And now we can't drive down that section of the road. And I've been informed that because we have other ways of getting out of the park, they are not going to replace that culvert or fix that road or put a bridge or anything in, basically because it's going to cost them money and they don't want to do it. Is that something that we can fight in any way, shape, or form? It's the road that I used to take directly out of our trailer park, and now I have to wind around and wander around. And my concern is that the way the people park, emergency vehicles getting in and out of here could be a real problem.
In a general sense, I would say that the landlord's or the mobile home parks owner's responsibility is to make sure you have road access. Now, if you previously had, and I can't speak specifically to your situation, but as an example, let's say if you had a 2-minute drive to the main road and now it's a hour drive to the main road, that may be something that maybe you could say, hey, you have a responsibility to fix this. Or if it's creating a safety hazard, like you mentioned, for emergency vehicle access, that's really going to be more about maybe a code enforcement issue than it would be a legal issue. If the landlord can say, hey, you can still get to the road, it may take you a couple extra minutes, your ability to successfully challenge that in court probably is not going to be great. When you get up to about an hour, maybe.
That's what I figured there. The other thing is, you were talking about utilities and how they have to make the opportunity for or access to those things available. Our park has also decided in its infinite wisdom that they're going to add on a fee for our wastewater. So they basically figured out supposedly how much it is per mobile home to deal with the wastewater and have tacked that on as a separate fee in addition to our lot rent. And they specifically call it a fee. They don't call it just a rent increase. It is specifically a fee.
Is that fee prescribed in your lease?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to look, but it's one of those things. We just feel like that, in addition to we've had probably 25 to 30% rent increase between that and the fees over the last year and a half.
Yeah. To the second part, that unfortunately is not surprising, or things I've not heard about sharp rental increases. Again, though, the fee has to be contemplated in your lease. You can't just, obviously, if you were to do damage to the lot or something like that's a separate issue. But as far as just saying, I'm going to start charging everybody $50 a month because I feel like it, you can't do that. Now you can start incorporating that fee into upcoming leases, but that would be, in theory, at least something you would have to work out and negotiate between the two of you when it came time for your new lease.
All right. I think that was it. Other than just maintaining general maintenance in the park, at least in my park, has gone to hell in a handbasket. And I don't seem to be seeing any kind of improvements, no matter how often I yell and scream and email the property managers trying to get them to do something. All I get are basically empty platitudes.
Again, I understand that doesn't surprise me. Now, if it's something that was promised as an inducement for you to move there or live there, I don't see it so much in a mobile home park setting, but say you're in an apartment building and they say we have coin operated washer and dryers in the basement, and then they break down and they don't replace them. You say, hey, look, that was what part of the reason I moved in here is because I could go down the basement and do my laundry. And if you're not going to repair them, then I should be entitled to some kind of consideration. Again, I can't give you advice to your specific situation, but generally speaking, if it's something they've done to induce you to move there, and that was at least part of your decision making, then perhaps you could go to them and say, hey, I'd like a reduction or something.
Thank you. I got another one, a direct message in the chat. This person is wondering if, in the case of someone like Jennifer, where the rent was increased from 600 to 800, could the folks who live in the mobile home park essentially create their own little union and negotiate to not have it be that much? Have you seen that happen before? And do you know, is there a way to push back, like for them to organize and push back on an unrealistic, unreasonable rent increase?
There are, across the country, there are renters unions. Those are things. I don't know of any specific examples in Alaska, but I also, admittedly, it's been a minute since I was a union steward, but I haven't looked at collective bargaining law in a few years, so I couldn't say for sure if there'd be any restrictions in that way, but I don't think there would be. So I would think that if the tenants wanted to get together and say, hey, we need to collectively fight against these rent increases or what have you, that would be permissible. Again, I don't want to speak about collective bargaining law and that in Alaska just because it's been a few years since I've dealt with it, but going off the top of my head, I don't think there'd be any reason that couldn't happen.
Thank you. Jennifer, I like your comment in the chat. If you want to unmute and just say it out loud, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. It took me a while to come up with that because I would think to myself, I'll just move. And it's, what's that going to do? That doesn't do anything because what does the landlord care? I have to fill my unit. He doesn't because I own my mobile home. The outgoing or the incoming tenant is responsible for the space rent. It's not like I'm renting an apartment and I can threaten to leave it and he'll go, oh, let's reconsider, because then he'll have to go through the time and expense and whatever to fill that apartment again. In my case, owning the home but renting the space, there's zero incentive for him to negotiate or reconsider because he doesn't have to fill the mobile home. If I walk away from it, then he will get to own it and then he'll have to fill it, but that's free money to him. But if I want to keep the asset in the capital, then I have to sell it. And until I do, I have to continue paying the space rent until the new owner takes it over and they pay the space rent. So that in my circumstance, the landlord isn't out anything for me. So we don't have the same rights as non-owning tenants, whether it's an apartment or a mobile home or whatever. We are less than they are because we have less leverage. And I'll even use charged verbiage. We're hostage to the landlord and feel hijacked and have less recourse. It's just unfortunate and unfair.
I don't disagree. I will say one thing is that if you, and this may not be much help, but if you are trying to sell your mobile home or do get to the point where you want to try to sell it, the landlord can't unreasonably restrict that sale. And he can't he basically can't jump in as an intervener and say, well, you owe me so much out of the sale or anything like that. He could restrict it based on any reasonable reason that he could restrict anybody's ability to pay, credit, bad criminal history, something like that. But if there's a reasonable person that's wanting to come in and buy it and they don't have any negatives, any reason against them that they should not be allowed to buy it, then the landlord or the mobile home park owner can't just.
I interviewed a mobile home park owner and he keeps adding on mobile home parks is because he says that they're cash cows where he doesn't have to do what he calls the headaches that an apartment building owner would have to deal with.
I'm going to now play a short excerpt from an interview that I did with my younger brother last Thanksgiving. My little brother, David Andrew, yes, we have different last names. That's a long story, but he is my full brother. He is an investment banker, and he will be discussing one of his most reliable investments, his mobile home parks. David Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
What got you interested in mobile home parks?
In my case, a friend of mine had started doing commercial real estate, and one of his jobs was actually helping buy and sell mobile home parks. So he sent me a park that he was selling. And after reviewing it, I called him up and just said, look, this makes a lot of sense.
My assumption is that if it's profitable for you, the owner, by purchasing a mobile home park, that it's probably not that great for the person renting. Do you just own the land?
Or that's a good question. For the most part, we don't like to own the homes. We only own the land. The cost of home ownership comes in two forms, right? It is the cost of purchasing the property for which your home sits, and then the construction and maintenance of your home. That's really what we're talking about. A lot of people might not have enough money to buy the land because land is often expensive. Whether this is good for the person or not, I would say 100% it's good for the person. My first argument back would be, show me a less expensive, affordable housing solution that is not subsidized by the government. There isn't one. And so I would say this is actually hugely beneficial. There is a huge demand for this product because it is affordable and it is achievable by so many more families. Not all families want to live in an apartment. That's 100% real, right? I want to have some pride of ownership. I want to be able to choose my paint colors. I want to be able to choose what I do with the interior of my house. I want it to be mine. This is a way to do that.
It's a starter home.
It's a starter home. Or it's a retirement home. I would tell you a lot of parks now are 55 plus. So where you have to be 55 years or older to live in. Put it in their perspective of someone living on a fixed income, Social Security, right? If they're getting $2,000 a month and rent for an apartment is $2,000 a month, all their money would be going to rent. But if they could just go rent the land for $500 a month or $800 a month, depending on the community or where they are, there's still a surplus.
And so $800 a month for the mobile home that you own, it just seems problematic because it seems like $800.
You're not renting the mobile home, you're renting the land.
I know. You own the mobile home, but we've already talked about most mobile homes are not really mobile. And you're basically renting the land that your home sits on. And although $800 a month is not enough really to rent an apartment in Anchorage anymore, it's close.
You're hitting on the points of what makes a good investment. When we look at it, what is the substitution, right? What if somebody doesn't buy a home and put it on here and rent the property, what could they go get instead? And so you go look at single family residences in the area. And if single family residences in the area are $100,000,
then that's not a good
that's
market.
probably not a great market to be in.
Ours are $450,000.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's a real market.
How much is a brand new standard mobile home?
Okay.
If you bought it from the factory, not already existing.
There's huge differences in quality. A lot of people look down on mobile homes. They don't think they're very nice. And there is some product out there that is pretty inexpensive. And so you could probably get a 32 foot or even a 40 foot single wide for $35,000. So pretty cheap.
Cheaper than a lot of people's cars.
On the other side of this,
That would be brand new.
yeah, that's a really cheap unit, Andy. You need to, most of the units that we were buying and putting on our property were costing around $50,000 to $55,000 a unit.
In Anchorage, we have mobile home parks that have been there for decades. And we tend to have less of them as time goes by. And from speaking to a mobile home park manager, he said a lot of people thought that it was because developers came in and bought these smaller mobile home parks so that they could put something more valuable on it. But he said that's not true. What happened was that the smaller parks could not afford to pay for their own infrastructure. That really the larger parks were the only places where they were collecting enough fees and had enough capital to be able to make sure that they had everything workable inside the park.
Well, that may be true. There's certainly economies of scale. So we have parks where we run our own wastewater treatment plants. And you're talking about spending $1 million to put a wastewater treatment plant in. I don't know what the economics are in Alaska, but that's what it costs us here in Texas to probably build a reasonable sized plant for one of our parks. And to go spend $1 million and then to operate the wastewater treatment plant is an ongoing expense. And so, yes, you need to have larger parks in order to do that. But just there is a natural attrition here with parks for two reasons. One is what you kind of identified earlier, better uses for the land, more valuable uses for the land are taking old parks, and parks are getting redeveloped. And then the second is the whole NIMBY issue, the not in my backyard. So while parks are disappearing, new parks are not being developed, specifically because many people just don't want them.
As their neighbors.
They have a negative view.
And is there evidence to support that it lowers the property costs of houses in the vicinity?
I have not seen that.
Really, to be frank, you don't really care.
I can tell you this, that one of the prettiest parks I've seen is in Yountville, California, which a short bike ride away is the French Laundry. So I would struggle with anyone saying that mobile home parks are just terrible for property value when one of the most expensive and acclaimed restaurants in the world is a mile from one. Mm-hmm. It seems crazy to me.
Okay, let's talk about you and your decision to purchase some mobile home parks and whether or not that's been a good investment.
Sure. I had all the biases that everyone else has. I don't think anyone should feel bad for having that bias. But as I looked at it, I realized this actually makes pretty good money if these revenues are consistent. And then as I dove into it, I realized the cost structure is pretty low because you don't have to maintain the homes. Each homeowner is responsible for maintaining their own home. All you had to do is maintain the land and the infrastructure. And for the most part, that's roads, sidewalks, if there are sidewalks, water systems, septic systems, in a mailbox or a serial mailbox. Pretty easy. Throw in some street lights, some security cameras, and your fancier places, you may have a community center. But for the most part, it's pretty
low maintenance
down the middle. And the operating expense is usually running 25 to 35% of gross revenues. For every $100 in rents, we have to spend $25 to $35 in expenses, which is better than, say, apartments. Apartments are a little more expensive. They're more like 45% operating expenses. You're looking at something that is more profitable. Then it's just a matter of managing it. I am a fiduciary to the people I manage money for. So if we buy a park and it is in their best interest to redevelop that park, we will.
You're beholden to the investors, not the residents.
That's correct. 100%. There are resident-owned parks. So residents can have that option to buy their own parks and own them themselves and manage them themselves, which I have seen. And it's interesting. As with any HOA organization, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. It all depends on the governance you have in place.
We have a drastic need for housing in Alaska, particularly on the lower end of the income scale. And something that you hear people say is that we used to have more mobile homes per capita than we do now. How do we get more mobile home parks? How do we do it?
I would talk to your local jurisdictions about zoning and about the rights to develop, because especially urban areas, they have so many rules and regulations around what has to be done. You have to have a sidewalk. You have to have a curb. The lots have to be at least
David, tell me what you need those to be, and we can make that happen. Like whatever a developer needs to say, oh, Anchorage we can do a new development in Anchorage because they've gotten rid of all of these code that made it more expensive. Now is the moment.
If all you're truly trying to do is add homes and add safe homes that people can get in and out of, what more do you need than sewage, electrical, water, safe roads, navigable roads for your winters, and that's it. Like, don't add anything else. Every little addition that you add to it just adds cost. You add cost, you have to charge rents to get your money back from those costs. right?
David, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I hope that's helpful, and I hope it's applicable to the Alaska.
Are there any books about owning mobile home parks?
There are not. But look, if I could leave your viewers with one thing, it sounds like you have a positive view of mobile home parks, and I would tell you that we have a very positive view, and I don't mean this just as an investor. I mean this as a solution to affordable housing crisis that we have in this country. It is a really good blend of, yes, you're going to be renting some portion of it, and more often than not can be the most expensive part, right? If I want to live closer to town, land values are pretty expensive, right? I'll tell you what we discovered in our investing, which I think is important. Again, a lot of these negative views and what I want to wash people is really just a view on the poor. Some of these parks can be pretty run down. It can be pretty poor. And then parks are rated on a star scale, 1 star being the least desirable, 5-star being the best. And a 5-star park or a 4-star park, they're nice. And these are wonderful places to live, to raise families, to retire.
Thank you so much for being on the show today.
All right. Bye.
And I guess, Charles, I don't know if you have any comment on that, but it just sounds like the mobile home park owner is making money, a lot of money in some cases, without really providing a lot of services in return.
I have lots of comments on that, but none I probably should share in my role as representing Alaska Legal Services. So I'll keep my mouth shut on that one.
I'll note that SJ noted in the chat there's a documentary. SJ, is that a documentary about mobile homes?
Oh, yes. It was on PBS last year, and I watched it last year. It was about a mobile home. I believe it was in Colorado, how they got like a co-op to fight the kind of corporate greed that was going on in terms of the sale of their mobile home. But it's a very good documentary, and it goes over how they did this. And it was on PBS. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll drop a link to that in the show notes when I release it as a podcast. And let's go to Jennifer.
Thank you, Representative Gray. Is there any chance that a law could be passed restricting rent increases to either a percentage or inflation or the CPI or something? I don't even know, that could limit this. Because I agree with you. This park is a cash cow and brings in $250,000 in rent annually. And is there a potential that a law could be created to restrict or put limitations on rent increases for mobile home parks?
I will answer that as a legislator working in the Capitol in 2024 and say that dealing with the political realities of the building right now, it would be very difficult for me to pass any sort of rent control statewide because we have so many legislators in the building who are really pro free market and believe that the market should be what controls what rent is. I'm not sure, but I'm going to direct a question from what you said to Mr. Ward, and that is it legal for a legislator to make a law about rent that only applies to mobile home parks and not to apartment buildings?
Really, that would be really more of a question. I hate to play tennis with it, but that's really more the laws of the state are what the legislators decide they are, the governor agrees to. But I will say this, that there are already in the Landlord Tenant Act 2 or 3 very special exceptions or bouts for how mobile home park owners have to work with their owners. And based off that precedent, I would think that you could pass other legislation that would further control that interaction in some way. But what that should look like or how that would get through,
I'll tell you what, I have some ideas. So that's good to know. So if the mobile home parks are already spelled out separately, then I think there might be an appetite for some sort of rent control for mobile home parks only. And my staff that's on this call, let's take a look at all of the bills that are potentially going to be brought to the floor that we could possibly add an amendment that might provide some sort of rent control for mobile home parks only. I think that's something that we could just start looking at now and seeing if there's potential there for us to do that this year. So thank you for that question, Jennifer. We will look into it.
And I appreciate that. If I could just real quick add on to that, I just sent you a link of Nevada's bill that I'm not sure the status of it, but was introduced in their legislature. And it's an article. Real quickly, it was in a park where they were paying $6.45 in rent. It was raised another $40 in September 22, and then in December, a multi-billion-dollar global private equity investor, Carlyle Group, bought the park and notified its residents of the 151 home community that rent would be increasing to $1,010 a month. So from $685 to $1,010. And that article is about what the Nevada legislature was trying to do about it.
Hey, thank you so much. And I actually have a couple of friends who are in the Nevada legislature, so I might reach out to them and get them to tell me exactly what we need to do. But
Sweet.
Thank you so much for that. And
Thank
then
you.
last question to iPad.
Hi, oddly, my name is Jennifer as well, but
hi,
so
Jennifer.
it's been throwing me every time they were talking to the other Jennifer. One last question about services and such. One of the things that I'm sure it was in our lease, and I think we've had to renew it. I'm not sure. I can't now remember if it's in the new one, but our mailboxes are terrible. They can be jimmied with butter knives. I've stopped having any packages sent to my mailbox because I can't even be assured that I'll get the package slip because my mail keeps getting stolen. I find my mailbox wide open all the time. I've repaired the lock. I don't know how many times I've reached out to the park saying, what can we do? And she basically ignores me. Isn't mail service something that should be included in something like a mobile home park or an apartment building? Shouldn't I be able to get my mail and get it safely?
I would think so. Yeah. I think that would certainly be something that, particularly if that's something that was advertised when you moved in.
I've always had mail service, and I've lived in
Yeah.
this park for an extended period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. That to me seems like an ordinary, whether that's an essential service, which is when you can really force the landlord to do something, may be tricky, but there's provisions within the Landlord Tenant Act if there's things that they should be providing that they're not. So that's certainly something I think you could look into and see if there's a remedy for. I'm being cautious here because I don't want to get too far into the weeds of your specific situation, but would certainly think that's something that would be worth looking into at least.
Okay, is that something we can reach out to Alaska Legal Services for?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I was just going to offer that, Jennifer. Charles, if you want to drop into the chat a way to contact you, and I believe that Dan Coons, when he was on our renters' rights one, said that one thing that he's able to offer, that Alaska Legal Service might be able to offer, is a letter from a lawyer to the mobile park owner. Basically, maybe they don't need to go to court. Maybe that you could, a letter from a lawyer might do the trick. Is that something that you guys can do?
Oh, sure. Obviously, I tend to view court as a last resort, not a first resort. So obviously, anything you can do short of getting something resolved short of going to court is something that you would want to try to do. And that could include letter writing, phone calling, other things as well, mediation, perhaps.
I could always go to the post office and get a post office box, but that's hundreds of dollars a year that I would really rather not spend.
Sure. Understand.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Demetria Veasy, and I'll just have you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself. And thank you so much for being here this evening.
Hi. Thank you, Representative Gray. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today. I am one of the assistant directors with the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Division of Employment and Training Services. I oversee all 13 of the job centers throughout the state. Anchorage has one job center, the Midtown Job Center, that's located at 3301 Eagle Street. And in each of our job centers, we provide employment and training services to each individual community. Our Midtown Job Center is our largest job center in the state, of course, because it's in Anchorage. And so we provide probably the most comprehensive services out of any of them. In every job center that you go in, there is a resource room where you can go and apply for jobs for free. We've got computers and fax machines, copy machines, telephones for you to call employers. We have staff on site that can help with your job search, that can look over your resume with you, talk to you about the jobs that you've been applying for, and provide tips and tricks on how to be more successful in obtaining your employment goal. We do workshops on resume writing, on interviewing skills. We do mock interviews. Probably my most favorite service that we provide. Mock interviews is a really good way of improving your interviewing skills. We provide feedback on things that you can do to improve your interview. We always ask each job seeker to let us know what job they're applying for so that we can ask interview questions specific to that industry so that they have an opportunity to actually practice questions that they would most likely have to answer in a real interview. We also receive state and federal grants that allow us to help individuals pay for training in order to increase their skills and education to get a job at a livable wage. We assess the labor market and what the needs of our employers are. Our employers are really our first customer. And so we also provide direct services to employers in every single community and helping them to fill their jobs. We make sure we have a really good grasp of what the hiring needs are in each community so that we are marketing those jobs for those employers and we're helping to grow the workforce in each community. And so with the grant funds that we receive, we use that funding to pay for training expenses. We can pay with our federal funds, we can pay up to 104 weeks of training. With our state funds, we can pay up to a year of training. And the funding that we have may not necessarily pay for the entire cost of a training program. But it that usually paired with other grants and other scholarships, we do our best to make sure that our participants are not coming out of pocket.
Demetria, really quick, someone in the chat just wanted to ask what the name of the training program is again. Also, if you could say, who are some of the employers that you work with and what's the type of jobs that you're helping people get trained for and do?
Oh my goodness. There's way too many employers to name, but we work with employers like BP Exploration, Walmart, Fred Meyer, Lowe's, almost all of the large retail companies, banks like Credit Union One, New Vision, First National, ConocoPhillips. We work with a lot of employers. We do also registered apprenticeships through the U.S. Department of Labor's Federal Apprenticeship Office. And we help our employers become U.S. Department of Labor registered apprenticeship sponsors. And we also have some specialized apprenticeship grants that are short-term grants that we can use as well. We can pay for that for those related instruction costs. And then we also do have a program called On-the-Job Training, which is similar to a registered apprenticeship, but it's much shorter term. And we can reimburse an employer that is willing to hire someone that does not have the skills and or education that is needed for a job. If they're willing to hire someone that has the soft skills that they're looking for, but may not have the experience that they're looking for, we may be able to negotiate an on-the-job training agreement with that employer, where if they hire someone and train them, we can reimburse up to 50% of that person's wages while they're being trained for up to 6 months.
Awesome. Hey, if people want to learn more about your organization or how to access your services, where should they go?
They should go to the Midtown Job Center at 3301 Eagle Street in Suite 101.
Like 8 to 5?
That is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Okay. And is there a website?
There is a website. It is jobs.alaska.gov.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much to Charles Ward. And thank you to everyone for being here. I want to be conscious of the time. We'll also drop the links in the show notes, including the PBS special, including the article that Jennifer shared about Reno, and also the link for jobs.alaska.gov and Alaska Legal Services, as well as the phone numbers to be able to reach Charles Ward.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-465-4940.